Hello and welcome to WKYC's digital platforms. It is great to see all of you. I'm 3 News journalist Jorge Ramos Pantoja. And as we continue to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month here at Channel 3, we continue to have those important yet fun and educational conversations about diversity and inclusion. And today's topic is no exception. Today's conversation usually sparks a fiery discussion between Spanish language purists and the so-called free thinker community. So we're talking about the difference between Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and Latinx or Latinx, as some people call it. And to explore further in this topic, we would like to welcome our guests, starting with Dr. Damaris Puñales Alpizar. She is an associate professor of Hispanic Studies and chair of the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures at Case Western Reserve. Dr. Puñales, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us here today. And our next guest is Gus Ollas. He's a leader in the Hispanic community, entrepreneur, business executive with strong opinions about the term Latinx. He has a bachelor's degree in political science and government, Spanish and foreign affairs from John Carroll University. Gus, you have a lot of opinions, right, about the term Latinx?
I sure do, Jorge. Thank you.
We'll unpack everything for you as we go ahead. And our last but not least, third guest, Bella Sin, a professional dancer, stage performer, and model. Sin prefers gender-neutral terms and identify as Latiné. They serve as a volunteer in the LGBTQ community. Bella says her activism and outspoken personality help make them both famous and infamous. Bella.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to get in this conversation.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you for being here with us. And to those of you watching at home, make sure to pitch in and join the conversation, letting us know your thoughts in the comment section, also letting us know your name. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and break the ice and address the big elephant in the room. Let's talk about the terms Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and Latinx. Spanish, unlike English, is a very gender-based language. And that brings my question to Dr. Puñales. Would you explain the difference between Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and Latinx?
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for watching. And I'm excited about this conversation because this is a very hot topic. Sometimes it's a very sensitive topic for some people. I don't feel that strong about that. I do feel that language is a live entity, and as so it changed over the time. So, for instance, about the Latinx term that has been just used in the last few decades, probably the last decade or so, and it it tries to address the issue of inclusiveness. So it tries to include everyone in that label of Latinx. But if you go, for instance, to any Latin American country today, nobody will use that term because, first of all, we don't know how to say Latinx. Most people in Latin America, we will say Latiné, and especially in the Caribbean. But I understand where it comes from. I understand. And the term Hispanic, it came about in the decade of the 70s and 80s when the United States had to label all these other people. And I want to emphasize, especially on this, that all these terms, what they do, they try to name the other, quote unquote, being us, the other, So it's kind of a designation to let the rest of the people that we are not equal, that we are not part of them, whoever them are, okay? So, but the Hispanic term, it came from that perspective, from trying to include in the census all people with some kind of Hispanic heritage or descendant. While the Latino term that is used also widely, it refers to everyone in Latin America. Actually, in a personal, from a personal perspective, I do prefer Latino or Latin American. Why? Because in that way, you don't exclude from that group all the people from our continent who speaks another languages. I mean, we have to keep in mind that we are a very wide and big continent with many people from different nationalities, different cultural backgrounds. I mean, we have Brazil, who is a giant country in every aspect, economically, culturally, but they speak another language. They speak Portuguese. So
Right.
why not include those people inside that denomination? And the same for many islands and countries in the Caribbean. For instance, in Belize, they speak English. I mean, the official language is English. They are not Hispanic, so they don't belong to that classification. And on the other, I mean, there has been some debate about the Hispanic term coming from this naming people who speak Spanish. But at the same time, it has a colonial flavor, if you want, because it refers to the Spanish Empire, or the former Spanish Empire from Spain, who conquered and colonized this continent like almost 6 centuries ago by now. But the point is that when you refer to Hispanic, then the Spanish people from the peninsula, they don't consider themselves Hispanic. They consider themselves Spanish or Spaniards. So there are a lot of, I mean, the spectrum is too broad, is too big to be one term for everyone. So I guess that at the end of the day, what we have, at least is my personal opinion, what we have to come down is that whatever the denomination, we have to appropriate that denomination. I mean, not let the society or any culture to use that denomination against us. I mean, yes, we are Hispanic. Yes, we are Latinos. Yes, we are Latinx, or whatever you want to call us. But we belong here. We are part of this society. We are part of this community of different cultures, of different languages, of different flavors, of different ways of seeing life, you know? And I guess that in that way, we have to work, I mean, from our own community, the Hispanic / Latinx, Latino community, we have to work harder to make that possible, to make the society seen us as part of their own society. We're not different.
So sort of to recap, Hispanics would be any person who comes from a Spanish-speaking country, pretty much, and then Latino, anyone who comes from Latin America, if you will, right?
I mean, and both terms I have some sort of exclusive and excluding part, because if you say Hispanic, then you are leaving out all the people who doesn't speak Spanish in the continent.
Right.
And then, but if you say Latino, then you are leaving out the Spanish people from Spain, you know? So.
Absolutely. And what really brings this conversation is the term Latinx, which we're discussing here today. And that's where your experience come from. And then Bella, she identifies herself as Latiné or Latinx with an E or an X, because, you know, like we said, Spanish is a very gender-based language. So Bella, would you expand on your experience and the terms Latino, Latina, Latinx, and why you feel like there is a need for a neutral gender term, not only with the word Latino, but with all pronouns really in Spanish?
When we're talking about Spanish, we have to understand this is not an original language. This is a colonized language that we were given. So we have a multitude of over 200 indigenous identities in Latin America, including of the overall of Turtle Island, which is the United States and Canada. What we want to do is also include people that are non-binary and also transgender. They like to go ahead and not identify with a gender. And that's very important because homophobia, transphobia, and femicide have been incredibly horrible things that have pried our community through machismo, and in general, in addition to the terminology that we already have that was based to given to us by white supremacy, is an addition of including gender non-binary individuals like myself. They use they, them, ella. But in another coin, it's a good idea to ask people what their pronouns are, because people in this call may be him, he, him, she, her, and especially to trans individuals, having an entity that is a gender non-binary might not be their preferred pronoun, which would be she, her, he, him. And that gets us into the form of pronouns. In Spanish, I use ella, which is a general inclusive, at least gender non-binary. term. But what I do want to put together, that's not just a conversation that we're having in the United States, this is a conversation that we're having all over Latin America, because Argentina just put the X and their IDs to go ahead and represent non-binary individuals. What we want to make sure of is that we're still having a division, and I think they always want to lump us together in between the identities. I was like, well, we have to call this group something. Let's go ahead and call them Latinx, Latinx. And Latinx does lend itself to linguistic oppression to a certain point, because this came from academics from above. It's like, oh, we're going to use this as a gender neutral term. Hey, that doesn't lend itself to Spanish, like the doctor just said. Latiné lends itself to Spanish. It is widely adopted in Mexico, South America, Central America. But I think it's important to denounce the fact that still our marginalized minorities within the spectrum of Latin America, Central America, usually are LGBTQ plus individuals, part of that community, and we don't see the same support or us included in the same conversation or inclusion when it comes to pronouns, when it comes to political power, when it comes to spendage. We don't talk about the Latinx and Latiné community, queer community individuals in there, especially in the trans violence that has been happening so much in Latin America, Puerto Rico, Cuba. And these are terms with evolution that are going to come, like Hispanic came, like Chicano, like Chicanx. All those terms are just going to be evolving with time. And will we agree in them? No, but it's important to respect gender identity and sexuality. And we're going to not unify. I don't think that we're ever going to unify in this conversation, because it's so different between terms. Some of us learned Spanish from our parents in the United States, and other ones didn't. I came as a native Spanish speaker. I also speak Nahua and Zapoteco. And I can tell you, in my indigenous language, we don't have a gender. So it's interesting how things are evolving. I would like to see through time us understand that in base, we have to unite against what we need to respect about one another.
Yeah.
But the term Latina and Latinx are as important as just asking, hey, hi, my name is Bella. What are your pronouns?
I think you had a great point right there. It's all about respect, really. And that's why we're having this discussion right here at Channel 3, in order for other people to really understand these terms. And that really brings my next question to Gus. Like we said during your introduction, Gus, you have a lot of strong opinions about this term Latinx. Would you expand on your opinions and what your feelings are towards this term?
I am a little passionate about this Latinx use of the word, and it is all about respect. It's all about understanding, the gender and so forth. I think I look at it from a perspective of, just to give you some notable examples, like corporate America, politicians basically now are changing how they speak to ingratiate us, with minorities. It's like a growing use of Latinx as a descriptor for Latinos. We got so much going on. This all began in the 2000s among activists, how they gained currency basically among this marketeers, media personalities, and progressives. So to me, the intentions behind Latinx, I still see it as being very benign. Myself, a son of immigrants, well, actually an immigrant myself, you take offense to it. Why? Because you start looking at, Spanish doesn't need to be changed. From a standpoint of progressives, they argue that Latinx fixes the gender nature of Spanish, which, they maintain it's unfair to women and excludes individuals who don't identify as male or female. And it's true that nouns are gendered in Spanish, but it's unclear what and how it affects Americans when it comes down to it. How does it really affect the United States? We are Americans as we sit here. We got to keep that in mind. So English is not grammatically gendered. We know Latinos is inclusive in both languages. Substitute like Latin and Hispanic can adequately describe the population that is Latino or non-binary, as you were saying, Ella. You take that into a logical conclusion. A push for gender-neutral Spanish now requires us, a language that's spoken to 570 million people across the world. Now we got to change it from that perspective. So you start asking yourself these questions about Latinx. I'm here in Cleveland, and you talk about the Cleveland Foundation, you talk about all these foundations that are now asking for requests, and all of a sudden there's a section in there for Latinx. And I'm like, what is this? What happened to multiculturalism? Rather than making Latinos feel included, like progressives are implying the way our families speak is fundamentally inadequate for the United States, in the American culture that we all came here under. I mean, it's offensive to 95% of Hispanics who, like my parents, speak Spanish. Basically, they spoke Spanish to us for us to maintain the Spanish language here. It's treasured. It could be old traditions, whatever you may call it. But as we all know, the gender, the non-conforming Americans should be treated with compassion and respect. But if someone wants to be called Latinx, that is fine. But the label should not be forced upon Latinos. Hispanic Americans face plenty of challenges, you guys all know. The last thing we need are progressives or this woke-splaining explanation, how you want to put it, how to speak Spanish. And bottom line, I just can't use Latinx only to map the identity experience. One word just doesn't define this, as you were saying, Professor. One label doesn't define this. When you get to unmask the layers of our communities in different ways, like you were saying, Bella, there's a lot of indigenous, there's a lot of about ourselves in the way we negotiate. And I just don't want to have the US just put us under one word that works for all. So I just don't see this ever coming to a fruition of we're going to name it Latinx, just because of the studies right now are very difficult to push it. You got too much time right now. We keep talking about it, it may happen. That's how things happen. It happened with the biracial discussion. Why were people called mixed? That's a little bit more insulting. Why did people, back with Jesse Jackson with this whole black, he changed literally the word to African American. I don't know if you guys knew that. He pushed it through the electoral process. He used that word African American. They felt that black was a little bit more, derogatory in that aspect. So again, we spend time on this stuff. I think it's important on Hispanic Heritage Month because the word is out there. But we got other things to talk about. And this is how I feel about it, Jorge. I'm sorry, but Hispanic, Latinos, Chicanos, we still struggle with education advancement, incarceration, teenage pregnancy, police brutality. I go on and on and on. But we are suddenly talking about gender nouns as our priority. It's crazy.
Right. So you do understand the fact that, just to make sure everybody understands the same thing I perhaps understood, you do understand the fact that people might not identify with a specific gender, specifically in Spanish, but your problem is that you feel like the term Latinx or gender neutral terms are being forced into people's lives, if you will, right?
Well, it's being elevated. You got to keep in mind our communities depend on a lot of foundations. They depend on a lot of the academia. They depend on a lot of the media for communication, for funding and perspective, and that's where all this resides. I hate to be so direct about it, but that's how I see it from a conservative view. I see it there.
Yeah. So, Dr. Puñales, I feel like this is appropriate for our next questions. Can you expand about research done by universities and professional affiliations about the term Latinx? Is it acceptable to use it, or is it just straight up something made up by liberals, as Gus said before?
I guess that we cannot put the political tag to the Latinx name itself. I guess that it was given just to put a whole population under the same name, under the same tag. But on the other hand, we have to keep in mind this here. I mean, languages are alive. They're living entities. So it doesn't matter if we try to, and we, I mean as a society, no as an academic or as no one else, but if we as a society try to impose the Latinx term, it will work or it won't. It won't. I mean, if we remember just a few decades ago about Esperanto, and probably, I don't know if you know about this, the Esperanto language was this lab language that was invented, and it was supposed to cover all the community and to solve all the communication problems between people, because it's a very general language in which every person on earth will be able to communicate with each other. What is Esperanto today? It doesn't exist, So the same could happen with the Latinx term. It's a very easy term to use, and especially to put a lot of people under the same name. But on the other hand, if you go down to the communities, as Bella and Gus were saying, if you go down to the communities, communities either that they were born here from Hispanic parents, or they immigrate here, whatever happened with them in their life, if you go there and you ask, how do you identify? You won't find a single soul saying, oh, I'm a Hispanic. Oh, I'm a Latinx. You say, okay, I'm Mexican, I'm Cuban, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Venezuelan, whatever, because we tend to agree more with the roots that we have in our own culture. And of course, as a social issue, it's easier and faster to put a denomination to name everyone who comes from Latin America. But as we were saying here, and I guess that this is very important, we have to respect what people want. I mean, if you want to be, I don't have a problem being called Latino or Latina or Hispanic or Latinx, because I don't feel that belongs to me. That's a tag that has been put on me, because they want to identify me. They want to put me in a little box. And that's fine. That's how society works. We are always being put in different boxes for different things. But at the end of the day, what is important here is that we have to go, and that's my personal feeling, we have to go beyond that. We have to overcome those names that are given to us, and we have to feel and we have to own our belonging into this society, because at the end of the day, we are living here. We're not going anywhere. We came here to stay, and we are contributing to this society in many different forms, from many different perspectives, from many different points of view, politically, religiously, you name it. We are contributing to this society, and we are part of this conversation. So it doesn't matter how they call us. The important thing is how we do people understand that we are here and that we're not that different from any other nationality or any other group of people living in this country,
That's a great point you have there about representation and identity. AP recommends people to call other people by their nationality. So Puerto Rican, Cuban, Mexican, instead of using the terms Latino or Hispanic, if you will, in this case. So what can you say about that? Is the term Latino here to stay, or should we use other terms such as Hispanic? The term Latinx, is it here to stay, or should we use other terms as Mexican, Cuban nationality, if you will, or the term Hispanic?
I guess that's a question without an answer, because you cannot predict the future. You cannot predict how the language will evolve and how it will modify. We have to think that actually language is reflecting what is happening in society, as Bella was saying. There are so many things going on. There are so many changes happening already in the society. How we perceive people with a different sexual orientation, with a different ethnic background. We are changing our perception about ourselves. And language is just reflecting that. It's not the perfect term. It won't be. But one day, I'm not talking about two years from now, probably 100 years from now, somebody will look back and say, oh, they were debating that. That was silly to be debating that, because now we call them whatever, So we have to think from that perspective, that language, it will evolve according to the society and according to how society move on different issues and on different topics and different circumstances.
Right. And Gus, what do you think? Is the term Latinx here to stay? What do you think is going to happen in the future?
Well, I look at it from a standpoint, believe it or not, Latinx is in the Webster Dictionary. It was added in 2018. So it's there. It's here to stay as a use of a verb or a noun, however you want to put it. I just think in my generation, I just don't see it panning out. I think the doctor hit some points there. It's going to be by choice. It's going to be the more we have these conversations, not that I don't want to have the conversation, from my perspective, we give it more credit. We give it more identity. And that, to me, in my mindset, I don't even want to have these conversations personally, but it's for an educational perspective to have these discussions. I'm just a believer that, we've had such a struggle with Latino and Hispanics to get to the table at the corporate level, at the political level, using those terms in documents and so forth. and just the way it's been rooted. Maybe I'm old school, maybe I'm one of those that, I got a younger generation with my kids, they understand the word of what Latinx is, and that's okay, that's fine. But like to what the professor said here, it's a moving, it's evolving, it's live, the language changes and so forth through time. I just don't see it in our generation. I don't see it happening in the next 10, 15, 20 years. I really don't. That you brought up a great example with Esperanto. I mean, that's in the dictionary too, and no one's using it, and that was a push. My biggest thing when I see all this stuff is when you start looking at this stuff so critically, like the biracial. I brought that up earlier. Biracial was such a, it was brought about in the sense that, you had now white and blacks, marriages, generations. How do you address that? How do you fund programs for biracial? So you start getting so secular on this stuff, and it gets worrisome, because this conversation is very civilized. We're talking, we're respecting one another, and we can't have too many of these conversations today the way we're having it here. That's the unfortunate piece. I mean, I can respect it all day long. I know my style, my approach, but at the end of the day, it's so hard to see it in society, and you want to have more of this kind of stuff take place.
Great. Bella, is it here to say a term Latinx? Do you feel like our kids will perhaps continue to use it as the years pass?
I want to really emphasize that you cannot discount what this generation coming up is doing. Now we have educated Chicanos, Latinos, Latinas, Latinx people. We have all these college educated individuals. We are having all these teenagers, all these 20-something kids coming up in the age of social media where everything's rapid, it's instant, it's together, everything can be a trend within seconds. The fact that the selfie in word is in the English dictionary, it's something new and fun. But what I have to make sure that I say is that we're not here forever. The older generation, all of us eventually are going to leave a mark, but the old ways are dying faster than we can go ahead and keep a grasp as a historian. We can put them in the history books, but right now there's a lot of historical mending going on because of a lot of the things that were done. Like I like to say that Latinos are in Latinx and Chicanos and all these immigrants are Americans' ghostwriters. They have always been here. We have always been here. In Northeast Ohio alone, we've been here since the early 1900s, doing all the work that we need to do to put people forward. And these conversations are not only conversations being had by our particular demographic of people, they're being had by the AAPI community, they're being had by the Black community. But the important part in two parts, I'm going to put this together. Afro-Latinos are always discounted and at the table. They also use the word Afro-Latinx and Afro-Mexicanos. As identifying ourselves by where we come from, it's great. But when we come to the United States, they need to define us to go ahead and roll us into that ball of capitalism. It's like, how can we capitalize about these individuals that are doing this and this and that? How will we pander, cater, or how do we put them in a box so we can monetize off of them? One, because this is a capitalist society, and that's unfortunately what we have to sometimes do. But when we're coming up to the tables with these young individuals that are coming up and putting together their minds work in ways that we can no longer understand, because we did empower these individuals with a mouth, we did them with independent brains, and they are coming forth, not only identifying themselves and talking about their truth as being transgender, non-binary, as being gay, lesbian, and all those terms, yes, evolved, like LGBTQ evolved to LGBTQIA, and also includes a two-spirited part for those of First Nations. We can't say that something's here to stay or not, because these individuals that are coming, these kids that are coming up, are going to take what we do as parents forward. And I feel that Latinx and Latina are going to be here to stay. I know that I'm going to be using them. And I know that my child uses them as a she, they. So it's important to just remember pronouns are important as a show of respect. And a lot of people are not even ready to have the pronoun conversation. I can't tell you how many times we have had to have this conversation at home about, hey, mom is mom, but mom is now they, them. Ella, and my mother has had those conversations with me and them right now, being able to say, ella is my daughter. And having that understanding that all Latinx people, all Latinos, all like we have, I think what I'm trying to say, and I think it's passionate to me to say, we're adding an extra word to our definitions, because linguistics always evolve. We're not speaking Elizabethan English. We're not speaking Spanish. Spanish don't think that Latino Spanish is good or Latinx Spanish is good, period. So do I see those words staying? Yeah. Do I see it used by the younger generation more? Yes, 38% of Latinos, Latinx, identify as Latinx, pardon. And is that a group that we need to pay attention to? Yes, because in turn, the Latinx community is part of the LGBTQ community. And that LGBTQ community is part of queer history happening right now. And part of conversations of, hey, did you guys know that there is no pamphlets in Spanish for queer Latinos, Latinx here in Ohio? There's like this much here in Ohio, and they use the word Latinx as an or Chicanx as identity. So I think it comes down into having a moment of pause and be like, hello, my name is, introduce with your pronouns. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you want to say, hey, Gus identifies with Latino, remember his pronouns are he, him. And the doctor here identifies as a person from Cuba and their pronouns as she, her. So I think it's just important to keep in mind that we are heading into a broad ocean of terminologies. But in the end of the day, we need to, like Gus and the doctor said, they're trying to pin us into something. We have already very big struggles, but this is not a struggle that we need to discount, because this word represents a community of people that right now have no access to mental health, no access to resources, and unfortunately are dying at a staggering rate, because as part of the LGBTQ community, we're already having ridiculous amounts of suicides happening right now within our transgender and non-binary immigrants.
Oh, no, let me interrupt you there. I appreciate the way you're explaining this. I'm learning as you're talking. And I agree 100%. It's the identity, it's the respect that we should have with one another and how you greet it and so forth, and you move on. I think the trouble that I have, and I think those that are, when you say there's those participating and understanding Latinx, there's only about 2 or 3% of the population, last time I checked, is accepting the terminology. I think those that are outside right now look at it that we're all being grouped, whether gay, lesbian, whatever it may be. There's a struggle there. There's an identity there that there are many issues in those communities that they need to assimilate. They need help. They need support. And I understand that. I think from a cultural perspective, the majority, as you know, culturally, I've been very accepting of it, in our own Hispanic environment, whether it's homosexuality, whether it's lesbian, whether it's transgender, that has not all been accepted as it has been in mainstream as much. So there's a little bit of that culture, that Latinx falls into that. It's just, you want separate, you want Hispanic, you want Latino, you want Chicano, Tejano, whatever, in separate, and to be able to identify yourself separately from that aspect. So when I hear you speak on that, you say it so well, so eloquently. I agree with everything you're saying, but I kind of say, okay, we're still harboring on this Latinx as an identity point, and I don't even want to be a part of that Latinx.
I think what we need to do, I think what you need to do is, to all due respect, I think what you need to do is to add it as part of the alphabet soup. I think instead of using a broader term to explain all of us in, which is impossible, because even the Black community is having those issues, even the Asian community is having those issues, we are adding the term Latinx and Latine to the end of our alphabet soup of Hispanic, Chicano, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine, Afro-Latino, Caribeño. Like there's so many, Texans are Texans. Texicano is a term and people use it as a part of a term. But I think that what the media and the world is trying to do is giving a gender non-binary, in like a non-gendered term is always going to be impossible to do because even non-gender terms in English are not being taken because of the gendered stereotypes and structures that came in with colonization. Colonization brought us gender terms. We didn't have gender terms. We were running around before having conversations as third-party contestants of it. So what we need to understand is that, do we need to go ahead and tell the media, hey, don't lump us in a term, use all the terms together, but sometimes people can't even figure out what Hispanic means, let alone Latino. So when we're telling them, it's up to us to educate them, be like, hey, they may be Hispanic, they may be Latinx, they may be Latino, they may be Afro-Latino, because we still haven't even gotten into the whole ball of anti-Blackness in our community. And that's another conversation we need to have later. But it's just like, we have to accept that if you don't want to be Latinx, just simply tell people, oh no, I identify as, I'm not this is also washing out, I think, into a certain respect. I am Latinx because I'm non-binary. I am Latina because I'm non-binary. But you're a cisgendered man and you're a cisgender woman and you're a cisgendered man. So is that washing out my identity? Because now everybody can use the term Latinx, and therefore I'm just out the window and nobody's seeing that part of my intersection. So multiple narratives are important to go ahead and take in conversation to understand how we all function as people. I also don't want to say that we just need to have conversations as humans, because that's erasing a lot of narratives that we all have intersectionally. But maybe just adding Latinx and Latiné to the cornerstone of our alphabet soup might be a better situation, because we never asked to be called Hispanics. We never asked to be called Chicanos. We never asked to be called Latinos. Those are terms that came with linguistics, and linguistics evolved. Like she was saying, everything's evolving. But what we want to do is not be left behind the evolution and continue to go ahead and be as inclusive as possible in the conversation to respect those around us, because in the end of the day, we're going to have to unite to fight the greater evil. And that's white supremacy.
You are both, Gus and Bella, raising great points. And I really want to take a moment to appreciate the diversity in this room. I mean, Bella, you're Mexican, Gus, you're Colombian, Dr. Puñales, she's Cuban, I'm Puerto Rican. So we're sort of a melting pot here, bringing different perspectives, which I love, really. And this actually raises my next question for Dr. Puñales. You know, we have the Real Academia Española, the Real Academy of Spanish, which is in Spain. Who decides what's right and what's wrong in Spanish? Like, is it going to be acceptable at some point by everybody at a level where it will be acceptable to use it without receiving some sort of backlash?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jorge, because actually, the Real Academia is located in Spain. That's right. But we have to keep in mind that in every country, almost in every country of Latin America, and even in the United States, we have members of that academia. So it is not that they are there trying to put names or accept names or whatever. There is a communication, an open communication all the time. And sometimes they do change, or they do accept a specific term, and that term doesn't go anywhere. Vice versa, because as we were discussing here, language is just a reflection of the society and the changes in society. A term comes to be alive by itself, and then over the years, the academia has to accept that that term is good, and they have to be okay with that. And we have to keep in mind that what the academia is trying to do is trying to get some sort of regulation or regulatory approach to language. But if we go deeper than that, every country in our continent speaks a different variety of Spanish. I mean, the Mexican Spanish is not the same as the Puerto Rican Spanish or the Venezuelan Spanish. And sometimes the term that we use to name one object or one feeling or whatever is different from one country to another. And let me tell you, you were talking here about the melting pot that we are in this virtual room. And in my family, we're the same. My husband is from Chile. My oldest daughter was born in Mexico. The little one was born here. And we don't use the same terms for the same things. And we're a family. So we have created, and I'm giving you this example just to show you how the language is alive, it's a live entity. We have created our own language. I mean, we have the family language. And for instance, when we go to Cuba, and we talk, my family in Cuba, they say, what language they're speaking? Because we name things differently. And the same when we go back to Chile. I mean, the kids, my daughters, they are speaking and they're naming things with different names, and that's what is happening. So in that sense, I'm just bringing this example to illustrate that the academia, of course, they are a regulatory entity. They regulate the language, how the language should be written, the grammar, etc. But at the end of the day, they have to keep the door open, because all this new terminology is coming. It's been here, and with the time, we'll know if they will stay or not. Probably we'll find another better solution. Probably in a couple of years, as Bella was saying, we will find with these new generations that are more open in every aspect and more inclusive than we are, probably they will come out with a new terminology that will be better accepted by everyone.
Great.
So in that sense, I guess, for me, what the academia does is very interesting, because they are there, in their tower, trying to regulate and to control the language. But no, you can't. I mean, there is no way that you can control something that is alive and is moving all the time.
Absolutely. And as anticipated, this is a conversation that could go on for hours, really. And I'm sure that, our communities will continue to have these conversations as our cities continue to diversify. So with this being said, Gustavo, just final comments.
No, you know what? I'm looking forward to a Cuba Libre, un peaceful.
Oh, me too.
At this time. So, this has been a great conversation. No, listen, I wish, this is good stuff that you're doing, Jorge. Again, I learned a lot here, just sitting here and listening to the professor, as well as Bella, on this whole Latinx. Just know from a Cleveland perspective, it's still nestled. It's out there talking. I see it now from a foundation request and all this stuff on the nonprofit sector. But like, I think what we were saying here, I think we just have to be respectful of how we're going to be identified and get that. It's probably going to be a new act of introduction, non-binary. And so, I'm learning. I'm going through this process myself. Okay. And it's something that I can be machista and say, I've got, whatever. At the end of the day, it's got to be respectful on the professional level as well as out there. So those are my final words.
And it takes time. It's a process we're all going through at the same time. Bella, final comments.
As a person that's incredibly patient, because my mother taught me how to be patient to an extent, I think people need time to learn. I think all of the things that we're unlearning behavior, breaking generational barriers. We are healing generational wounds. We are essentially like living this generational struggle that starts with our parents coming here. My mom came here with me, and, I had to get used to a lot. But like, what I think it's important is that we have time to look at each other and really just be open-minded, to have a real conversation with each other as people of our countries, as Latin people, and come in and say, hey, listen, I see you, I hear you, and I see you and I hear you, and have this common amount of respect. Like I was wanting to mention, I was like, I've never been in a conversation where it didn't end in a yelling match or somebody blocking, because we're at this point, we have lost the art of conversation to a certain extent, because everything's done online. Nothing can be actually talked out in the room and be respectful. But when I tell you that when people use my proper pronouns, and like, there's some stuff that I laugh off, I was like, hey, a mistake is a mistake. I'm always going to sit and be patient to make sure that people understand the intersections I stand in. But I'm also not going to, whatever you think about me is none of my business. And if you can't, at the most, treat me with respect, I don't have to have discourse with you. And you, in the end of the day, the internet's the internet. But I do want to invite everybody to just be respectful in having these conversations, because to people like me, just understanding who I am as a person took a long time, and I'm sure that they did too. And
Yeah.
it's not the end of the evolution just because we just adopt respect to each other. So
I think you both said it right. It's all about respect. Dr. Puñales, final comments.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be part of this conversation because at the end of the day, what we're trying to put together out there is how we feel about the different terminology with which we have been labeled, you know. But at the end of the day, we have to keep in mind this. We are all different, but we are all the same. We are human beings. And when we go down to that basic truth that we are human beings, that's the most important thing. And then the next step is, as my colleagues here, Bella and Gus were saying, we have to learn, and it's a learning process. It's a daily learning process. We have to learn how to respect each other, how to treat each other respectfully, even if we don't think the same, even if we don't eat the same, if we don't look the same. But we are humans and we are on this together, you know. There is no salvation, there is nothing in the future if we don't work together, all of us, independently of where we came from, what language we speak, how we feel, how we express our feelings. We are just humans. And the future of the planet, and we are talking all the time about the future. Okay, there won't be any future if we don't do this together. And I guess that the basic rule of that is that we have to respect each other and we have to understand each other and where each other of us is coming from, just to move forward.
Those are great words to really recap what we just talked for a while here. And I really want to thank all of you guys for your time here today. And thank you all for joining us. We really hope you enjoyed being part of this conversation today with us here at WKYC. To our guests, thank you for your time, like I said. And to you watching at home, don't forget to watch our Turning Point special this Thursday, October 7th at 7 p.m. right here on WKYC. Thank you, guys.